Welcome, everybody. I'm hoping everybody's had a lovely day. We are at 101. CJ, do you feel like you got pretty much everybody in?
Yes, it looks like most of the members are in.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Giogo, who is going to be chairing today's meeting. The absence of Tim Sexton, who has taken another position, and so he is no longer chair. So to that end, Giogo has graciously agreed to, as vice chair, to step in that role. So Giogo, take it away.
Thanks, Tom, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for being here, both members and guests that we have with us. And I think, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're taking the position that DOT has on MCOTA until you guys potentially assign someone else, correct?
Correct, until we have a new assistant commissioner.
Perfect. Thanks so much. All right, so it looks like we have a quorum present. So let's go ahead and get the meeting started. If the members could just quickly type in the chat that they're present so we can just make sure we have everybody here for attendance, that would be wonderful. And we'll just move right into review and approve of the meeting minutes for March.
If you can call that up, CJ, that'd be great. All right. Classic case, I have to blow things up. So, excuse me?
Oh, I was going to move to accept the agenda.
Well, has anybody seen the the agenda and the minutes? Okay. I was going to buzz through the minutes from last time, kind of reiterating the strategic conversation that we had last time. And we came to a consensus on our top priority, and we're going to be talking about that in much more in depth today. And hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at that. I will turn it back over to you to accept the agenda. And we do have a quorum, Giogo.
Excellent. So if we could get a motion to approve the March meeting minutes and then a second.
Bentley moves to approve March meeting minutes.
Thank you, David. We have a second.
Brandon seconds. Brandon Army.
Thank you, Brandon. If all the members could type in the chat, yay, if you approve of the March meeting minutes, or no, if you do not approve. Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. Next on our agenda today is a review and approval of the agenda for today. So it says March. Tom, we'll turn it over to you.
So today we have on the agenda is a presentation, and we have a little announcement about some legislation. Also, we all came through legislation, so we're anticipating next meeting we'll probably have more updates as to the legislation impact. And we'll have a special speaker about our plan that MnDOT Office of Transit is going through. And then the lion's share of our meeting, as you've all noticed, is the strategic direction that we're going to be moving through, and we'll get to that point. And then the public comment, this is a good opportunity for us to have anybody announce to us so we can make sure that we have some time for public comment. And then we'll talk about the future meetings, but it is kind of depending on our discussion relative to we walk through a strategic direction. So, and that's our agenda. So back to you, Giogo.
Thanks, Tom. If we have any questions, we'll certainly entertain those. Otherwise, happy to take a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting.
This is Myrna. I'll approve the agenda.
All right, we have a first from Myrna. Thank you very much. Can we get a second from someone?
Jerry Sutton, second.
Thank you, Jerry. For the members, all those in favor, please say yes or something in the chat. And if you do not approve, please also indicate so in the chat. Wonderful. The agenda for the day is approved. Thank you. Moving right along to the first order of business today, we have a presentation of the Greater Minnesota Transit Plan, and Tom, you're going to kick that off.
I am indeed. Thank you for that. Right now, for The legislation just wrapped up for all of us, and I'm sure we've all had various different new language that we're all be working through and plowing through, and we're no different. We have special legislation that happened at the very end of session, so there was not a whole lot of input from us on that conversation, and it's called dynamic transportation. And as we filter through that, we're going to be looking at how we will be able to meet the timeline. The reason why I'm mentioning it today is MCOTA was called out as a part of the work team task force that's going to be put together associated with that, as well as RTCC's Regional Transportation Coordinating Councils, a couple members from that to be participating in that dynamic transportation. The intent is, I think, this is an interpretation yet to be formally identified, is to looking at more options available to people and diversify those options and who are the different provider opportunities that may exist out there. Hence why I think MCOTA was called out, and specifically why the RTCs were called out. But more on that later, and you will see some connection relative to the next presenter. And Nathan Avenue is going to be presenting to us about the Greater Minnesota Transit Plan. Nathan, you got your PowerPoint all ready?
Yes, I do. Let me share it here real quick. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Perfect. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nathan Abney, and I am the Transit Planning Coordinator with MnDOT in the Office of Transit and Active Transportation. Today I'm here to talk about an upcoming project that our office is going to be working on, which is the Greater Minnesota Transit Plan. The Greater Minnesota Transit Plan will fall under the statewide multimodal transportation plan. This is the overall arching transportation plan for the state in Minnesota. That plan addresses things from transit to roadways to freight to rail, so everything encompassing transit. If you see on the graph here, under that you see the Greater Minnesota Transit Investment Plan. That was the last planning effort our office did. And that was developed by the request of a legislation request that came out, looking at the need for transit investment in Minnesota. Next to that, on the graphic here, you see the Greater Minnesota Transit Plan. This is the plan I'm going to be talking about today. This plan will be a new policy-based plan with innovative recommendations intended to provide a practical vision for maintaining and improving transit service in Greater Minnesota. This plan will be a policy plan that will reflect on recent trends and guide priorities for transit service in Greater Minnesota. The second phase of this project will be the implementation documents phase, which is the second box under the transit plan. That phase will take a deeper dive into some of the more complex topics that we're facing when it comes to transit in Greater Minnesota. What will be driving the implementation plans will be the recommendations from the Greater Minnesota Transit Plan. And a couple examples of this, what this might look like is updating our 5-year transit plans that we have across the state, or developing developing our funding formula for operations and coming up with a more equitable funding for operations in Minnesota. Like Sarah mentioned in the chat too, this initial policy plan will just be for the 5307s, 5311s, and the tribes. We will most likely expand that when we move into the implementation side of things, but right now with the policy plan, we really need to get a better grasp on what transit is in Greater Minnesota, and develop some policies around that to address some of these larger complex issues that we're seeing across the state. Some outcomes of the Greater Minnesota Transit Plan that we're hoping to achieve. We're really hoping to develop a strategic policy plan that will allow our transit agencies to adapt and innovate strategically. We're hoping to develop performance benchmarks, which will lead to continuous improvement and innovation. We're really hoping to do a lot of data collection and establishing benchmarks for performance. That way we can set goals and then monitor our progress to reaching those goals. Data-driven decision-making, again, incorporating data and performance measures into our decision-making when it comes to identifying trends and addressing issues across the state when it comes to transit. Assessing ridership needs and priorities. So the plan will assess ridership needs and determine priorities, enhancing service quality to meet the diverse needs of different riders across the state. Environmental stewardship, the transit policy recommendations will have emphasized sustainable transportation modes, which will contribute to cleaner air, carbon reduction, reduction in personal vehicle miles traveled. Streamlined operations, transit agencies will be better to equip their operations to align with our plan objectives, resulting in better coordination between different modes, services, and our office. And then lastly, and most importantly, is empowered communities. Our plan will have a significant engagement piece to it, which will facilitate collaboration among stakeholders, which will foster partnerships, leading to creative solutions, and really leading to a more responsive and inclusive transit plan. Some of the trends that we're hoping to explore further through the planning process, sustainability and carbon reduction. So looking at things like reducing our carbon reduction emissions, reducing personal vehicle miles traveled, looking at fleet transitions to more sustainable fuel sources, all things that kind of encompass the sustainability aspect of transit. Equity, we want to increase transit access and opportunities for underserved and underrepresented communities. Technology and mobility, so exploring supplemental or additional opportunities for mobility needs, looking at things like on-demand, microtransit, mobility as a service, and looking at these up and coming trends that are happening around technology and mobility. Transportation behavior, looking at post-COVID-19 impacts, looking at different modal shifts because of that. The hybrid work is popular right now, so seeing the impacts that has had on transit, especially in our small urban systems. So kind of exploring that a bit further to really get a better understanding of what the needs are and what the issues are when it comes to transportation behavior. Equitable funding formula, so developing an equitable funding formula for operations that's more equitable, that can serve the most Minnesotans. Coordination and partnerships, so facilitating collaboration among our stakeholders, fostering partnerships that lead to creative solutions, shared resources, and coordinated efforts. Service performance, so develop measures to monitor the needs of transit in Greater Minnesota to improve service. And then lastly, demographic shifts. We know there's some changes that are happening in Minnesota in the future. Our baby boomer generation is growing, leading to more disability and senior trips. We know Minnesota is becoming more diverse. So looking at things related to demographics that we'll need to address with our transit systems across the state. So we will be putting together 3 committees that will essentially drive the planning process. We're going to have a plan advisory committee that will be made up of our different systems, tribal nations, MPOs, and that committee will essentially guide the plan and provide policy direction and recommendations for the plan. We will have a 5310 representative on that committee as well. Then we have our technical advisory committee. This will be mostly MnDOT staff that will provide technical guidance and recommendations for the plan, reviewing documents, and then just providing assistance on some more of the technical aspects of the plan. And then the last committee, and probably our most important committee, will be our Diverse Riders Advisory Committee. This committee will be made up of community members, underrepresented community members, and then representatives from nonprofits that will participate in our decision-making process, and especially will bring perspective to the project as well. So as far as the plan itself and what that looks like, we have a 3-phased approach for the plan. Starting off, we have the pre-planning phase. That's the phase we're in right now, where we're preparing to hire a consultant to help us with the work, doing some of the preliminary internal tasks, and like I said, working through the RFP, drafting it, releasing it, and then working on getting the consultant hired. The next phase will be the planning phase. This is where the bulk of the work will be done for the policy plan. This will begin when we have our consultant under contract. This is where we're going to be doing, we'll be setting our goals, doing lots of public engagement, doing partnership engagement, developing our policies and recommendations, and then finally approving the plan. And then the last phase will be our post-planning phase. This will be the implementation phase of the project. So this is where we'll take a deeper dive into some of these issues and recommendations that come up from the policy plan, and where we'll be able to develop some action plans to implement some of the changes that are addressed in the larger policy plan. As far as timeline, just high level, we're really hoping to kick everything off with the plan this fall. And that's when we'll start working with our committees, and we'll actually begin the planning process. Winter and spring, finalizing our topics, continuing to develop the plan, and then move into the finalizing the plan. Hopefully by the summer of next year, we'll have a final draft of the plan, and we can begin our final engagement process to have the plan approved by the early part of winter of 2026. And then whenever it'll go through the approval process, and then the plan will be published. And then hopefully in the summer of 2026, begin that phase 2 of the implementation plans. And then we're also going to have, like I said, heavy public and stakeholder engagement that will take place through majority of the timeline of the plan. So with that, I'll take a pause for any questions. I know that was a lot of information, but we are just getting started, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks so much, Nathan, for the presentation. Maybe I'll kick us off. I did have one question. The plan
Sure.
approval process that you mentioned, what's kind of that process? There a specific group that approves, or is it a DOT approval after the steps that you articulated? What does that kind of look like?
Sure. Because the plan is part of the Minnesota Go family of plans under the statewide multimodal plan, there are steps we have to follow. So all 3 of our committees will approve the plan. It'll work through an internal process where different department managers will have to approve it. Different offices, such as government affairs, our communications office will need to approve it. And then eventually it will have to get approved by the commissioner's office as well.
Thank you, appreciate that. Other questions for Nathan? All right, not hearing any, but I imagine we might hear some updates along the way throughout the development of the plan as well, so look forward to those as well.
Yes, yep, I can definitely provide updates as we get going with the process here.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the presentation today and the all the work you put into the slides and presenting for us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, have a good afternoon.
You too.
All right, then moving to the next portion of our agenda, kind of the bulk of the agenda today is looking at revisiting some of our strategic direction and strategic planning that we had started at our last meeting. And so Tom is going to take it over from here.
Thank you, Giogo. Appreciate it. You all got this document sent out in your meeting packet, and you've had a chance, hopefully, to read through it and see what we're looking at. I won't reiterate everything other than where we landed at the last meeting. And we identified the top priority, work to identify driver shortages and address specific interventions throughout the enterprise that could aid in increasing driver availability. Listed the other two priorities in order that were there, but it was a consensus that to work with to identify driver shortage by far came out to be the biggest priority, the highest priority that we wanted to take a look at. So next steps is today's meeting. So slide down a little bit, please. Thank you. We're going to be discussing, and the intention for getting this out to you early is to give you guys, you agencies, the opportunity to engage other staff members, other individuals at your agency, or give you a chance to really kind of think through of how you would define the scope of work statement. As we move through this, we got to be very clear, because the intent of this is that by June of 2025, we're in a position to do what MCOTA is designed to do, is make actual recommendations, either in policy or legislation or a combination thereof if it's needed, to address some of the issues that we're going to be stepping into relative to staffing shortages. And our goal and objective is to get that in front of our senior leadership next summer of 2025. So the 7 questions that are asked, 7 being with also a suggestion to kind of help create and simplify our scoping process. How would you define a scope of work statement? Who are the key MCOTA members and stakeholders that you hopefully are going to bring to the table? And are there key stakeholders that are not MCOTA members? If so, who are they? Now I'm going to stop with those first 3, because the remaining ones, 4, 5, and 6, and largely number 7, are actually going to be guided in how we discuss it, the first 3 items. So that said, I'm going to kind of do a little round robin to engage people and how would you define the scope of work statement? And I'm going to pick on Brandon, if he would be so inclined to tell me from MPTA's point of view. He's also a public transportation provider, so he could, I think it's appropriate for him to speak on both parts.
So it's a difficult question. Because I'm not 100% sure, as we discussed in the last meeting, exactly how MCOTA would be facilitating operator or increasing operator availability in the state of Minnesota. I think to narrow it, what we would need to do is first try to identify what are our root causes. So we have increased DOT regulations, higher requirements for testing, lack of availability of testers, and then just a general differentiation between pay levels across different commercial driver or commercial license holder um, I'm drawing a blank on the word, professions. So in this, there is kind of an inherent conflict of interest between portions inside as well as individual individual agencies. So I would think that the first thing that we would have to do, now that I've gotten my opinion out there, because I just can't help myself, but I think the initial way to define it is to identify exactly what we consider to be the root causes. And then once we have our root causes set, if we've decided that it's some sort of a workforce development that is our main barrier, or is it regulations that is our main barrier? There was some discussion on the last meeting about coordinating safety requirements across all of the different sectors to make the whole field a little more interchangeable. I would think that would be the best way to both define exactly what all we have to get done. And then once we have our root causes in place, then we can work on narrowing the scope into those individual root causes. I hope that answers your question.
I think it is a answer, and I think it's a good answer. So thank you very much, Brandon. I appreciate that.
Tom, can I jump in out of turn and mention something I had thought about, because I think it resonates well with maybe what Brandon was mentioning?
Please do.
This one way that I had thought about this as I was reviewing for the meeting was to think kind of similar to the root cause concept that Brandon's bringing up, is wondering if we wanted to think about focusing on if we need new drivers who are currently not in the workforce, or if we need to address the issues that the drivers currently in the workforce are having. And, you know, as I say that, I know that I'm probably one of the least educated on transportation on this call, but it does seem like that might be a way to sort of send us in a specific direction with more tangible interventions versus kind of a broad, we need more drivers. And since I think one of the goals of the group here is to sort of narrow to specific interventions, we could certainly pick one and test that out with the best information we have. And then if that's not it, reassess, or maybe it is it, and we still have to fix the other side as well. But that's one way I thought about possibly narrowing the scope in the initial annual or the 1-year work plan.
Excellent. That's a very good point, and it's consistent with the conversations we have had for the last year to some degree or another to that point. I'm going to go to another agency that deals with a lot of transportation, but a little different view of the world. And I'm going to pick on Kelly Garvey from education. Kelly, you've had some time to think about this. What's your thoughts?
I knew you were going to pick on me.
I warned you. I warned you.
I know. So it's so much more difficult because I deal with the pupil transportation and driver shortages for school bus drivers. So I get, all I did was write up like maybe a little, I don't know. I just was like, what is the end product, or what is the focus? I mean, besides the driver shortage. So what does that all entail, I guess? And that's just where I'm stuck.
Let me possibly something with you, Kelly, and all of you consider this. As Brandon indicated, looking at the root causes of why we have driver shortages, you have them too. One of the things that Brandon alluded to was the conversation about there is a limited pool of actually Joe made this, a limited pool of drivers that actually exist. And so that's one of the challenges right now. And, is that maybe where we want to focus on how we bring, create the opportunity for new drivers to be in, and how do we deal with that? Or do we go back to some of the very specific items that Brandon was mentioning? So those are things that food for thought. Right now, we've got a fair, I wouldn't say a huge overlap of school bus drivers also are doing public transportation for drivers. There is an overlap.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, when you get into that competing for drivers, conversation, and of course, then the pay equity conversation is there. So food for thought, let's keep that in mind as we move forward on that. Anything
Yeah.
else, Kelly?
The other thing is, is the motivation to find drivers, and how do we get them motivated to be a driver, I guess, if that makes sense.
Well, we do know school districts have been doing hiring bonuses. So that has.
Yep.
that has
Yep.
happened.
Yeah.
But have we studied the retention of those drivers after they do the signing bonuses, and how to, the different program for signing bonuses versus another one? That's something that we could potentially look at as well.
Right.
I kind of purposely picked on two entities that are in kind of closer to the operations than others, but I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Ron, Veteran Services have do all kinds of volunteer driver programs, but also there's paid driver staff as well. And sometimes the officers themselves are actually providing that transportation. So how would you define the scope that would be beneficial from Veterans Affairs?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Good to be with everybody today. Yeah, the world of transportation and veterans benefits is unique, and we do have quite an advantage in the state of Minnesota, in that there are very solid networks of transportation supporting not just general transportation, but primarily healthcare transportation. And this is supported in a variety of ways between grants that are run through the agency out to counties. It is supported by nonprofit organizations that have transportation networks established. And it's also supported by the federal reimbursement program, in where folks, when they're transporting themselves, or if they have someone privately transport them to VA medical centers for VA compensation purposes, they are reimbursed for that travel. So from our perspective, one of the challenges, I hope I'm answering this question while I'm making these statements. One of the challenges that we also have, or that I've found has been very similar throughout, or the theme has been the replacement of volunteer drivers or drivers who are compensated, partially compensated for their volunteering, and keeping those volunteers or those paid folks either in those positions or replacing them once they've vacated those positions. So I think we're way ahead of the power curve when it comes to what networking we already have in place, and it's really about determining, how do we keep the human resources, the human aspect going in that process. I hope that I answered, Tom, the way that you were looking for. If there's anything else I could offer, I'd be happy to get into that also.
Yes, actually you did, because I wanted everybody to hear that the problem we're talking about has different kind of shades of gray to it, associated with how much of it is this a problem, but how does it play itself out? A lot of times the same volunteers that are volunteering for veterans are also some of our volunteer drivers for other programs as well. So, and we know our resource volunteer drivers across the state is pretty much, well, it was diminishing before we got to the pandemic, but it certainly has diminished significantly since the pandemic. So it's good to hear that one portion of our team here does have still a network that is viable and still keeping the wheels on the street. Anybody else want to volunteer on this? And I'm going to go to David from an advocacy point of view to some degree. It's not so much the technical aspect that I'm looking for that, but how would you see defining this question, David? David Finley.
Yes, thank you. I'm surprised it took you that long to pick on me, Tommy.
I always pick on you at first, so I thought I'd put you down the list.
David Finley here. Yeah, I think we would take a different perspective on this. Obviously focusing more on so we're just answering question 1 now, correct?
Correct.
Well, the scope right now, when I look at the statute, is broad in its advisory capacity and non-existent in its kind of wheels on the ground capacity. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
You're referring to MCOTA's scope of work, you mean?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I might take a different approach and try to find a way to have maybe a little more authority or some way to really push things through in terms of completing projects as opposed to just advising the legislature and other state agencies as to what they could or should do. If I had to pick one overarching thing. Is that unsatisfactory, Tom?
No, that is a perspective and a conversation. So how would you characterize that? What is the outcome that you're looking for to have done by June of 2025 then?
I don't know, maybe it involves a statute change. Again, this is just my personal opinion here. Not necessarily speaking for MCOTA. That would maybe give a little more teeth to what can be achieved, or maybe even narrows the scope of the work, so it is easier to pick projects or pick programs that we can actually have influence on in a meaningful way, in a way that creates change. Again, not saying that all is lost, but if I were to envision something or narrow something, that might be a good way to do that. I think, yeah, I'll leave it at that. But if you want to probe me more with questions, I'm more than happy to dig deeper if you want.
Well, I'm going to ask other people to dig deeper on what David has presented to us as an idea of that. If utilizing MCOTA as a vehicle to this, I do not want to characterize it incorrectly, but maybe more teeth, as you're referring to, is the funding capacity to actually implement. So whatever we recommend, we have the funding capacity to do so. That could be the recommendation at what we do in June at that point in time. But again, we all know, legislators, and anybody does, have to know specifically what are we trying to address and what is it going to cost and what is your deliverables over time. And that's the type of thing that we could give some focus associated with that. That still fits with some of the other discussion points that it does fit with some of the other discussion points. We do have some real technical details that Brandon kind of led us off with, and I just using that as a little bit of a foundation is we also have the ability to affect things in legislation by other agencies that may or may not be attached here. So if we're looking at motor carrier, that's still attached to MnDOT. If we're looking at DPS, public safety, they're not attached here, but it's something that we can have those dialogues. And how would we move that kind of conversation along when we get into the testing requirements for CDL and those aspects of it, and how we would move forward on that. So food for thought, give that. Hearing all that, Shirley, where do you feel Department of Health right now is more of a, you're working with clientele that is specifically working directly with clientele who's needing the services to be rendered. how do you feel us focusing on specifically driver shortages is going to have an end result that gets us where we want to become, and the want to be is yet to be defined by all of us. How do you see that, Shirley?
So our funding again comes in from the federal government or from the state. If it comes in from the federal government, it is definitely told how we can use that. And lots of our federal government do not have funding for transportation. And those that do have any funding for transportation, our grants go out to the communities. And when they go out to the communities, we ask our local public health how they want to work with those dollars. And they have asked the community, and a group that we just worked with and listened to, they talk about the shortages that are going on and they want to fill those shortages, but they get somebody in there for a short period of time and then they're gone. So they're very aware, the county boards are, and the other groups are very aware of what's going on. So all of these questions are brought up in many of the calls and conversations that I'm in. We have no resolve either. We hear it, but ours is to bring people together and how can we move that forward, just like what you're doing, and sit around the table. We would drill down and look at the assessment part of it. When's the time period that they're needed? How are they needed? What's the disability issue? What type of what's the insurance comes up all of the time? Who's going to pay for the insurance? Somebody will come in and then the pot will dry up. So those are the questions that we have. And the training, always, is that person really able to do that training? So all those questions that come up, we hear over and over again. So it literally takes all of us to try to decide that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but we are at the table trying to help solve the problem.
And that we very much appreciate. And we do know that many programs have very specific funding limitations, but as we've discussed a lot in the last 2 years is your clientele, your constituency is impacted by transportation that exists or doesn't exist.
Right.
Or,
And that's why we're at the table. We want to be part of the community. So if we're part of the community, it helps solve those problems. Correct.
that's what we're hoping to get here. Jerry, I'm going to go back to you, and I kind of held off you because Met Council has been dealing with a whole host of things associated with this conversation and recent changes that you've done with Metro Mobility and the enhanced services that you were rendering. But I think everybody is still kind of plagued by the shortage of drivers. And I know you've done a couple of initiatives, marketing initiatives. You want to kind of step into the space and say, what can we do? What would be helpful to MCOTA or potentially from MCOTA for Met Council as we move this conversation along about how we're going to address the driver shortages? Jerry.
Yeah, so first of all, I will go back to what Brandon said, and I agree that the first thing we need to do is better understand why we have challenges hiring, and secondly, retaining. And is it a matter of just not being competitive enough, or is there just not a big enough pot of persons available to be drivers? I think it's the first of the two. I think there is a big enough pot. I think we are seeing significant improvement in our the number of drivers that we are able to hire and retain. But we're not really sure why. And so I think getting down to that why is important moving forward. So we can continue on the right trend line that we've been seeing recently. We did do some initiatives where we, ridership is down overall. And so there was extra money in the budget because we weren't delivering all the service that we had been pre-COVID. And so we reinvested those funds into increasing driver wages. And I think we're seeing the benefits of that right now.
So you're
I
in
don't know.
game, yeah, no, that is great. Let me characterize it, and then anybody could correct me if I characterize it, especially you, Jerry. I characterize it incorrectly. What I'm seeing is that relative to some reimbursement or the wage factor is certainly an element associated with that. However, there's and answering the question, is there enough people in the pool? And this is where regional situations are going to be unique. Metro is not northwestern Minnesota.
Correct.
And so there is going to be, we are going to have a situation in parts of rural Minnesota where there just aren't enough qualified candidates. The pool isn't big enough. And then we're also going to have a situation where the pool is big enough, but maybe we need to get that magic combination of what is the wage that's going to be creating the incentive to be there. So I don't want to boil down everything you just said to just that. Am I leaving anything out, Jerry?
No, I think that captures it. And I would agree. I mean, I think that is, the challenges in the metro area are different than the challenges in greater Minnesota. And so it's not a one size fits all conversation when we start trying to dig down into the details of why and how we can attract additional drivers.
Can I ask for a quick clarification, Tom?
Sure.
Are we talking about operators or are we talking about volunteers? Or are we talking about both somehow?
The answer at this point in time is yes to both of those. The however on it is this time, this conversation, this discussion right now can decide whether we want to focus on volunteers or we want to talk about paid professional staff.
Because there's a completely different set of challenges between one subset and the other.
Exactly. And that's well worth exploring. Volunteer driver services, Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong, but volunteer driver services is less of an issue in the metro area than it is in greater Minnesota. I know it's a big issue in greater Minnesota.
Well, so Tom, to your question, I'm not sure I 100% agree with that. I mean, Met Council doesn't deal with any volunteer programs. And so I'm not able to speak to those issues. I hear from others that, they still struggle to get volunteers on board. And I do think it's an issue in the metro area to the extent that we know public transit cannot meet all of the needs out there. And so I think volunteers are hugely important to meeting all of the needs. So we all should have an interest, even in the metro area, of increasing those driver pools to the extent that we're able.
I appreciate that. I thank you very much. And I feel standing corrected. So I'm standing corrected on that point. And I'm sure there's a few Metro people who will take me to task on what I just said. That said, Brandon, back to you a little bit. You asked the question, are we talking about paid professional staff or are we talking about volunteers? And you're right, they're two different worlds apart. What's your thoughts?
So if we're looking to narrow and better define exactly what we're working on, I think that is going to be one of our very baseline key areas that we talk about. If we're going to be working on what do we have to do for operators, we will be asking different questions and looking at different solutions than we would be for volunteers. I don't see an interconnectivity between the two issues between the two subsets. So to go all the way back to your question one, how do you define a narrow? I think that's step one. Exactly what operator pool are we talking about?
And to pick on Jennifer, you're brand new. Welcome aboard. You stepped into the deep end of the pool. You have any thoughts about that? And then I'm going to turn back to what Brandon just asked.
Yeah, I'm kind of a newbie here, and I'm just, my mind is kind of all over the place, and I have more, I think, a lot of just fragmented thoughts right now, and more questions than anything. I'm glad Brandon asked that last question, because I've been going back and forth trying to make sense of this also from those two perspectives. I guess I'm also not clear if we're talking about, whether paid drivers or volunteer drivers, are we talking about hired through all the different agencies that we represent, or where, you know what I mean? Where are they coming from?
The question right now from most of us are dealing with through grantees, just like Department of Health. Grantees are impacted by the agencies that they may be working with, who are trying to pull together a program that needs transportation access, but because they're challenged to get the transportation access, hence it's a problem.
So we're
I
talking,
think,
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jean.
Oh, so we're talking about people across Minnesota accessing transportation, again, like through the different organizations that they are working with?
Exactly. And right now in the metro area and greater Minnesota, we have a fairly relatively robust, I want to qualify that a bit, robust transportation opportunities through public. However, as I think Brandon said, that we already acknowledge that public has a limited ability to handle a lot of the demands, and especially some of the constituencies that you guys are working with are, a good portion of them are going to be using public transit, but another portion of them, a fairly sizable portion, are going to be looking for a different kind of access to transportation. So
I think a lot of that overlaps. I mean, I think, how do you assess the needs of the customers? And I mean, there's so many different pieces to that about riders need education for what they're using. The drivers need to be educated in who they're working with. Riders might not be comfortable in terms of safety. I mean, there's a lot of different questions there. I know that I work for State Services for the Blind, and we just hired quite a few drivers for our staff because we had a shortage within SSB, because we have so many staff who are visually impaired and need to get all over the state for working. And I'm just kind of curious if there's any information that can be helpful through SSB in their recent hiring of folks. But I also know that they're kept busy, they're scheduled, 4 to 8 hour days. It's not like you're in rural Minnesota waiting, for a 15-minute engagement. So, I mean, that could be another factor too.
you postulated a really interesting question that I think we can spend some time exploring how that potential network that can be set up. And as Ron had mentioned, that we've got the veterans have a very robust system and a network out there that Ron already knows that I will probably go, and maybe we can work with that kind of conversation of how that can interact in that. Again, Veterans Affairs, like all of us, are subject to our funding sources and how those funding sources dictate to us, literally, how those funds can be utilized. So we always have to kind of keep that in our back pocket as we move forward on that. I think I covered all the members in this discussion right now. I'm going to go back to a couple of them that are in the conversation to some degree, is hearing all what we just said. Does anybody feel like, I'm going to go to Brandon's question and give some focus there. Are we looking at both drivers of paid professional staff and volunteers? Mind you, we're trying to narrow. Or are we looking for the ability to focus on volunteers versus focusing on paid professional staff? Food for thought. And I'm looking for answers. Jogo, I'm going to pick on you, sir.
I think that's an excellent question, and I appreciate that Brandon posed it in order to try to narrow. I almost, in my head though, it resonates the opposite direction a little bit, which is, I think the thing that we have struggled with for some time in MCOTA, and David sort of alluded to this, is finding things that we sometimes as a enterprise can have impact on. So I wonder if, I like what Jerry and Brandon said about root cause. I wonder if we did sort of a little bit of a brain dump amongst the group about what some of the root causes are, and then we filtered with what it is that we could actually influence. If it would sort of answer the question that Brandon is raising. I understand why we might want to make that decision. It feels like an overly narrow decision to me a little bit. Because we could say like, well, we want to focus on volunteers. Let's say we did that, but then we get to the point, just hypothetically speaking, of the fact that one of the biggest problems with volunteers is the federal tax law. Well, I don't know what we're going to do about federal tax law. So I'm wondering, so I just offer that as a way to think, if we use that as a filter to our root cause analysis that was posited, and then sort of take out the things that we can't influence.
Good point. Just reminder, right now at the state level, some of the sting has been taken out on the state tax level issue, but the federal level is still in process. The reason why people refer to the act of Congress as being very slow to come, we are talking literally an act of Congress, but there has been a lot of traction nationwide on that point. But back to point here is, I think you're right. I think if we focus on one or the other, we might be missing some of the key components that actually impact both the one way or another. So the root causes of what that's associated with. And I'm kind of alluding now that unless people have anything else you want to inject for keeping us focused, I'm thinking the focus is leaning toward probably trying to find the root causes and trying to identify those root causes that may be off root causes to volunteers as well as paid professional staff. Can I postulate that question to everybody? Are people doing things in chat and I'm not paying attention? Thank you, Sherry Munyon. Appreciate your comment. Sarah posted the commercial driver workforce study that's going on. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Shirley, Rhonda. And Shelley, kind of in.
And Tom, I see that Rhonda Danielson has her hand up too. Maybe she wanted to comment.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that. Rhonda, how are you doing?
Oh, Rhonda, I think you're on mute though. I see your lips moving, but you're on mute, Rhonda. Rhonda, if you can hear me, I see your lips moving, but you're on mute, so we can't hear you. There you go.
Okay, yes, I had been off mute. I'm having technical issues. I am sorry.
No worries. Go ahead.
My question, is there any way going forward that we can combine or find a way of, instead of competing for a limited pool of drivers, of finding a way to get drivers that qualify for driving school buses to simultaneously qualify for driving public transport and share those drivers instead of competing for them?
Definitely food for thought. There is motor carrier, if you're talking about paid professional staff, you're talking motor carrier requirements.
Yeah, I'm just throwing it out there, Tom.
But you know what? This is the idea point, not the critical point. I apologize. That food for thought. We'll just keep that on the table. How that would work. What would that look like?
And as we saw Brandon unmute, maybe you want to add something, Brandon?
I was just going to say that school bus drivers are already qualified to drive most transit buses already, so it's not vice versa, but because you have to have the school bus endorsement, but with the CDL and the passenger endorsement that comes with school bus, they can already drive most of the transit buses. So they are available across both. But with federal regulations that we talked about previously, you run into what's called an hours of service issue with them operating in both areas.
So
Joe, though, if I could make a comment, Jerry Sutton.
Yes, please.
I mean, I like the idea. One of the issues is that they, at least our service tends to be very peak dominant. And of course, that would conflict with school bus transportation as well. So the problem is that the drivers are needed at the same time of the day. However, there might still be an opportunity to, one of our challenges is getting split shift drivers. And so maybe there's an opportunity to use school bus drivers in the off-peak period and better manage driver pools that way. But just a little bit of thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. And I really like the idea of exploring this. Like I mentioned earlier, you'll understand transportation operation much better than I do. But I'll just give one example: non-emergency medical transportation, which is the Medicaid transportation program. We require that the providers be DOT STS certified, and so we have taxi cabs who are certified by Bloomington, or excuse me, licensed by Bloomington, or licensed by Minneapolis, or licensed by St. Paul, who are also needing to get DOT certified because that's what the statute says they have to do. And so that's one example in my mind of something that I think would be interesting. And the problem is I don't know anything about transportation standards. So I don't know enough to say that the DOT STS standards and the Bloomington and Minneapolis standards are somewhat equivalent, partially equivalent, completely not equivalent at all. But that, I think it's worthy of exploration. I mean, to Jerry and Brandon's point, and Shelley posted in the chat here, there might be some limitations to that, but it strikes me as there might be some opportunity there too. And maybe kind of digging in with one of our subgroups to find out where there might be some opportunity would be a worthy conversation. And maybe we dig in and we find that there isn't, but it seems like something worth chatting about from my perspective.
And if I may, real quick, I feel like we're drifting at this point. So now we're moving into transportation coordination discussions, which is a different subject again entirely. So if we wanted to focus on transportation coordination, I mean, I'm fine with that as well. If we're focusing on increasing operator pools or operator availability or volunteers, then yep, we should definitely go that direction. We talk about too many different ways where we can either coordinate or work on volunteers or work on drivers, and I feel like we're going to find ourselves in the spot we started in 3 months ago, where we have a giant amalgamous, untenable goal that we can't show any kind of real completion progress or benchmarks on over the course of a year. So I really think we just need to dial back a little bit and start getting back to exactly what it is we're looking at and what the root causes are. That's just my opinion.
Brandon, can I ask a little bit more about that? I appreciate what you're saying. I'm not sure I understand though. I think the last couple minutes conversation, we were trying to allude to that there are barriers to entry for transportation providers, right? And you alluded to a barrier to entry in the screening or the training that's required for providers. Those are all barriers to entry, right? And so if I think about those as a broader barrier to entry kind of concept, I think what I was suggesting is being certified as a transportation provider is a barrier to entry. And if each program has different barriers, barrier A, B, and C, versus just one barrier that's transferable, that could conceptually allow providers to bounce around. And even if, to the point that's been made by a couple of people, that the folks can't operate in two different industries at the same time, it would at least reduce the amount of time it takes somebody to leave one space and go to the other space, because they've already overcome the barrier to entry. So I guess, are you suggesting that kind of discussion is coordination and not about driver availability?
Yeah, it sounds to me like the direction that we were wandering into was, how do we coordinate the existing transportation services? And that's definitely a conversation worth having at some point in time. And I'm fine having the conversation as well about creating the single standard. I have some reservations about everybody having to meet STS standards, but it's definitely, as we're in the ideas phase, it's definitely worth having out there and having a conversation about. I just wanted to, I guess, try and refocus us and narrow our scope back a little bit before we started wandering too far into the coordination side.
That said, I think there is a tendency and us getting to, let's fix the problem now. And we can all enjoy that moment, but I think what happens is we get lost in the minutia and the details at this juncture. We still have to deal with the details, and that is down the line. What is being laid out here, and as we're talking about this, I'm going to remind people that who are the key MCOTA member stakeholders relative to this discussion that we're creating some focus on. And so I want that now we really haven't nailed exactly what we're looking at for our focus. I think barriers to entry for drivers focusing could be on the volunteers. It could be also on paid professional staff. I'm going to keep that open because I feel like that's an element of that conversation that still needs to be open. That said, who's not, who's sitting here at this table right now that feels like, yeah, I think I need to be a part of that conversation? Because right now we're going to set this up as work teams, and MCOTA's designed to have work teams to create some very, ideally very focused recommendations and do this. There's the meeting of the whole. We are the meeting of the whole right now of MCOTA. And what we're recommending is a subgroup. It doesn't necessarily have to be a whole lot smaller than what we are right now. But we've got some key players here that probably should be at the table. And I'm willing for them to volunteer themselves as who the key stakeholders are. Don't make me volunteer you. It gets real quiet real quick.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure, please.
So, because you have oh, wait. Maybe who are the key MCOTA members? Never mind.
Well, now you got me intrigued.
Okay. I think it's just the wording of the sentence. So you're looking at who are MCOTA members that are the key stakeholders, not just stakeholders.
Correct. Right
Okay,
now.
so the
each-
people that are
each state-
officially,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, each state agency has a set of stakeholders that are impacted by this conversation. So that said, I think there's a conversation that, I'm looking at Kelly. Yeah, I'm gonna do it. And I'm looking at Brandon. I'm looking at Ron. Yes, Ron, you're on the hook. And there's a few other people here that I don't want to continue volunteering.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Jenny. I mean, definitely Deed would be a part of that. I mean, I'm thinking of vocational rehabilitation, SSB, other parts of Deed. So I would consider us as an important stakeholder.
Excellent. Is anybody sitting here that does not feel that they're an important stakeholder in this conversation? Again, we're focusing on the root of the problem relative, still looking at volunteers and paid professional staff. Kind of setting it up. I'm going to go back to Brandon's thing, how he set that up. Is there anybody sitting here that does not want to be involved, directly involved in that? Now, let me extend it a little bit further because later on we'll talk about staff. You personally may not want to be, but maybe your agency has staff people who want to be or should be. I'm kind of looking at Giogo. He doesn't know I'm looking at Giogo. I think he's got a couple of people at DHS that probably would be instrumental in that conversation. Thank you, Jim. I'm going to ask my support staff to tell me who's volunteered and I'm not hearing anybody saying I'm not involved, so I'm going to assume you all are involved to some degree or another. And that kind of leads us to the next question is, are there stakeholders that are not MCOTA members? And if so, who are they? Now, MnDOT, from our point of view, think maybe DPS should be involved in this based on some of the previous conversation that overlaps with the Department of Education and the certification of bus drivers as well as some of the oversight that's involved. And of course, MnDOT's probably motor carrier folks might be attached to this conversation too. Just reminding everybody, that's not the Office of Transit, that's motor carrier, another division of MnDOT. Anybody else?
This is Jenny again. Is there a way to, I mean, it just seems like drivers, potential drivers and users are important in the conversation, and I don't know if there's a way to bring in those perspectives.
There is, and I know we would not able to hang up from this meeting today because Rhonda would remind me that often and frequently, and there's about a dozen other people on the call that would remind me of that. So I think we're also going to be looking at the agencies that work directly with the drivers would be important to have that if we actually can get a driver to volunteer their time or something to that effect, that would be probably beneficial to us as well. CJ, those are a lot of notes. I'm hoping you're keeping track of.
Working hard over here. Thanks, Tom.
Anybody else that's not at the table right now that you feel that should be?
How do you define not at the table? Are we just talking about government agencies?
Well, currently at MCOTA meeting right now.
Okay,
That could be other state agencies that are not here, but it could also be, as Jen has already opened it up to more of the end user view of the world. So. Am I missing chat? Now, how many people struggled with number 4? What are the key milestones to be achieved during the year to gauge progress? Did anybody take a stab at that and feel like, I think this is the milestone that we do? Now, our conversation has shifted from what you probably originally were looking at a day or two ago about it. But based on that and based on your point of view, what are you seeing as the key milestones to be achieved during the year to gauge? And, where are we going to have check-in devices? When we get to number 7, we have a kind of a schedule that may naturally create some opportunities for us to do some, like to have this milestone done by that. So Jerry, you're the last one that, Jen is the last one. Well, I'm going to pick on Jerry. Jerry, what do you think?
I suppose saying I don't know is not appropriate. I don't.
It's what I tell my teenagers that, telling me I don't know doesn't work for me. So.
I mean, I until we have a little more understanding of the issue and what the potential barriers and solutions are, I don't, well, maybe those are the key milestones to get an action plan in place.
Exactly. And Jerry, I kind of knew that you would do that, and thank you for doing it. So the key element right now, until we actually work through some of this stuff, we're not going to really understand what those milestones are. And specifically when you use the word key milestones, I think those are the aspects that we have to be looking at.
This is Sarah. Sorry, I can't find my hand here to put it up, but yeah, I would just reiterate kind of what Jerry said. I think maybe we could set a goal of when we might have a sort of those barriers, that sort of list of maybe from all the different members, the barriers that they're experiencing, and sort of put into one list so that we can, based on that, sort of narrow, sort of zero in on and have the discussion on what maybe barrier or barriers we're going to focus on based on, assuming there's maybe some overlaps between the different agencies.
Thank you, Sarah. And I am going to skip over number 5. I think that's a great idea. Let's discuss what Sarah just said, please.
I think I agree with Sarah. The only question I have is possibly on the format. So are we looking at putting together a work team and then having them work out the barriers? Or are we talking about each of us individual members bringing back what we believe the barriers are to see what kind of overlaps and then assign some sort of a work team to it? Or are we moving in a direction besides a work team and just trying to work through this over the next, I don't know, few months, just as this board, and then decide later if there's a role for a work team? Sorry, I keep asking questions and not giving answers.
Yeah, we'll make you give the answers later. That question right now is well worth asking. Thank you for asking it. I think one of the things is we're getting into how do we want to start organizing our conversation and exactly what Sarah just made a reference to is let's make sure that we captured each state agency's focal point. So that's probably going to be a work item that we're going to ask each of you to generate, you and your people you want to work with as your staff, to identify what are those barriers relative to driver shortages in the conversations of what's standing in the way of drivers from your point of view, from your agency's point of view, and also probably a statement of impact. I think everybody needs to always constantly be reminded, because of this barrier, this is the impact that plays itself out. So if we could do both of those things, that would be great. I think the intention, subject to conversation here, is we are going to be moving to a work team. It could be the same members that we have here. I think maybe what we would probably do is identify people as the core, but the entire MCOTA would be welcome to attend those conversations. I created this, we created it, for lack of a better way to phrase it, created this outline on number 7 that you've hopefully had a chance to look at as what we would be doing through the work process to try to get us to June 2025. So, and I think what Jerry just said was very point on, that how do we know, basically the next to it, how do we achieve those milestones that we're going to be talking about? That is something that still needs to be vetted out. And in turn, what is the risk achieving the priority? In other words, what's the risk is if we don't meet this priority, or if we do? So those are the questions that I still need to be answered as we move forward on this. And the number 6 is getting into what additional staff are you looking at and would be willing to devote to this. Obviously, a fair amount of a portion of time is going to be my time and some of my staff time associated with this. But I'm also looking for other state agencies that will be stepping into this. I've seen some volunteers here. Jerry, you've got some staff people that I know could probably be tapped in some way or another as appropriate, that we might be looking at this. So that all said, if anybody wants to volunteer, anybody, but you saw these questions, you knew we were going to ask them. So. Jen wants to do more research. I amen to that. Please do. And if I can help facilitate that conversation, I'm more than happy to help that.
This is Sarah. I might propose amendment to what is in the a potential schedule here that I think you're discussing, that if we're looking to have a target to have identified barriers and maybe a recommendation on maybe what to focus on, maybe we ask, whoever's, that, like you said, the work group volunteers to be on that work group, invite the entire council though to those work group sessions, and maybe bring that back to the council this summer, maybe July, August.
If you could slide down to the next part, this is where Sarah's talking.
Oh, sorry. I'm just thinking that maybe that would allow for enough time to have a few discussions to kind of let folks bring those barriers, have those discussions, and then bring that back to the council for discussion, maybe in the summer timeframe, so that there will be time to work towards a kind of work plan based on those barriers that maybe we're going to focus on.
So that said, and we're still pounding out the dates, but right now what has been postulated here is 5 meetings. This is one of the 5 meetings that we're doing now, and then the September meeting we would approve the work plan in January 25, as this is the meeting of the whole. The priority update as the work is continued, and the next bullet point actually talks about what the work team potential schedule for the work team. And then March of 2025, we would have draft recommendations. And then May, adopt the final recommendations. And the reason why that May of 2025 tends to be whatever our normal schedule is, that we would be taking to senior leadership. We're also proposing postponing, not canceling, postponing the senior leadership instead of this June, because we don't feel like we're ready to get in front of the senior leadership at this point, to look at doing that in October. The work team people who volunteered before they actually looked at all these dates, thank you for doing that. You're very brave. To that end, I think there's an opportunity for us to narrow the conversation down further, get to some of the points that Brandon was making and others have made points about how we can create the focus. And then we can also be addressing the issues of, what is going to be our fundamentally, what is today, what is our desired outcome come June? And I think right now we've scoped it, or we're starting to really scope it, and looking at the barriers, as Sarah and Brandon and others have mentioned too, how we can bring those to some fruition of how we can intercede and where we can't, and start really defining how and when that work can occur. Excuse me, a little dry. So does any of that make sense, or? I think the work team will pound out this schedule. I am going to suggest that we try to hang tough with the meetings of the whole of obviously today, and then the next meeting, instead of being July, would be September, because I think the work team needs some time to get things pulled together. And then January, March, and May, which tends to put us from an MCOTA point of view, kind of quote unquote back on schedule on that. Is there a consensus that the schedule of the meeting of the whole makes sense?
The meeting schedules make sense, as long as we are also willing to incorporate a level of fluidity to exactly what we're going to be working on in those particular meetings. So we may have that work plan already developed at the end of June, so July, maybe we start working towards finalizing, or so the scheduled dates look good. The subjects for each one, I think we just have to agree that there's a certain level of fluidity involved in that.
Others concur with Brandon's point of view?
Yes.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep, makes sense to me too.
Good. We're doing everything by consensus at this point. Does anybody really object to any of the schedule as it looks right now?
I have just a quick question. It's maybe too early. This is Jenny. Is it good to guess that these would happen on the fourth Wednesday, these work group meetings?
I'm glad you asked that. I was generally in my brain tracking that way, but we can get the team now to concur with that or not. Now, the work team is going to be meeting more frequently, obviously, than the meeting of the whole. But those meetings will occur too, so. And Brandon made a point that I'll pick up pretty solid, is if we get some elements done sooner, then we can move the conversation along faster and get our focus. The key element is being very focused on whatever topics that we're going to be really paying attention to. And that gets into the critical barriers that we're talking about for drivers to become drivers. And at this point in time, we're still talking volunteers and professional drivers. Thank you, Sarah. Sherry's got suggestion of what we might want to consider first. I think we'll take that in consideration. So, hearing no objection, I am seeing the next meeting of MCOTA will be September the 4th, Wednesday. Thank you for reminding me to point that out, Jen. And the next meeting for the work group will be June the 24th, probably the 4th Wednesday. We'll probably be looking at the same time slot, 1 to 3. We'll book 1 to 3 as we meet. If we decide we can do this in 90 minutes, great. But we'll probably put it on everybody's calendar at 2 hours. Any other thoughts, follow-up items, Diogo and members, as I'm tracking on? One, will confirm some of the barriers that were identified. We will confirm in communication, we'll send this out to you in our meeting notes. Who are the members of the core work team? Again, remind everybody that the work teams are open to everyone. Also, we will give, I will call it a tentative schedule for the work team as we move forward. Your homework is to identify other other staff members who may be attached to this conversation one way or the other. I'm thinking maybe Matt Knudsen or one of his staff, Diogo, might want to be attached to this conversation from DHS. Actually, oh, your new guy for non-emergency medical transportation. Oh. Anyway, we can talk about your staff associated with that. And if anybody else has specific staff, Ron, you may want to have somebody other than yourself or yourself and somebody else. That would be great. So you will be asked to kind of confirm that again with a follow-up from us. Any thoughts, feelings? We've moved this discussion along fairly well. We've got elements of focus. I think some people would like us to be more focused, but that's what we'll achieve.
Question on the action items.
Sure.
So it was mentioned a little bit earlier that maybe we would talk about the council members bringing back specific barriers to them for their
Yep.
operators and then comparing them. Is
Yep.
that going to be part of our action items as well?
Yes, thank you, Brandon. I'm sorry, I didn't, my hand notes are not legible here anymore. Yes, that will be one of the action items too. And that's something that we'll solicit when we provide this information. We'll solicit all those different items and we'll recap the action items.
This is Jenny. I'm just thinking, so if I, go back and ask for input, I want to make sure that I'm asking the same clear question that everyone else is. And
Jen,
I'm
would you like us to kind of give you some bullet points, talking points?
Well, you know what I mean? I don't want to, we've had a lot of discussion and I just want to be clear in order to get helpful information that we're also on the same page with what exactly we're asking. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I think we can generate some talking points for all of you.
Okay. Thanks.
Not uniquely you, Jen, just for all of us. Any other questions, thoughts? Did we leave something on the table that we forgot to pick up again? Now, you are all welcome if after this meeting you go, you want to have a debrief with me to get an assessment of what was really talked about. My door or my phone or my access to me is always available. It may help us inform how we do the talking points and a few other things. Matter of fact, I would even welcome that from anybody that feels that they feel like, well, I think this is something that we all should ask. This is more for the agencies that are looking internally for other stakeholders that might be a part of this conversation. Giogo, I think we're coming to the natural end of this conversation. We were scheduled to go to 2:45, but there is no magic to go to 2:45.
Well, great. So thanks everybody for that conversation and the engagement by so many members. Really appreciate it. And as Tom pointed out, we'll come back with the plan that we had just discussed and appreciate everybody's input into that. Reiterate Tom's point, the meeting was kind of iterative today. So if after today, the next couple of days, you think of some things that you maybe wanted to mention, if you didn't think of it in real time, feel free to share it with Tom so we can obviously incorporate that into moving forward. So with that, I think we'll transition to our next, our last couple agenda items here. So first, we didn't have anybody sign up in advance to do public comment, but we certainly have time for public comment and appreciate some of the public input that has been shared with us in the chat during our discussion. But let's open it up to see if anybody else would like to address the committee today. All right, not hearing or seeing anything in the chat. Doesn't seem like we have any public comment today. No worries. Feel free to let us know if there's things to engage on in the future. With that, we already discussed kind of our next steps as far as meetings go. So I think that'll be included in the wrap-up documentation as well. And we'll work on the agenda for the upcoming work group meeting. So if there's nothing else from anybody today, I think we can wrap early. And again, appreciate everybody's engagement on this critical discussion. Look forward to it continuing the next work group meeting. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Tom?